Welcome to the Citizen Mike Show. Thanks for tuning in. We do appreciate it. My name is Mike Brodinsky. This is the episode for March 19, 2015. On my right, the hardworking editor and senior vice president of the American Record Journal, Ralph Tomaselli. Ralph, we got a very full plate, and that's why I'm talking fast, because we have a lot of material to cover and a very special guest in the studio, the return of Craig Fishbein.
That's
Craig,
great.
Thanks for being on the show again.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and it's very timely that you're on, because we've got some big developments involving Craig. But hold on, before we get to the big developments that Craig knows a lot about, it is time all of Wallingford is waiting for. It is Ralph Tomaselli's Story of the Week.
Thanks, Mike.
You're welcome, Ralph. The
Story of the Week is headline, Zoning Board looks at medical pot rules.
Funny you should pick that.
Yeah. And that appeared on March 13th and was authored by Eric Vo, and I'll read from it a little bit.
Yeah.
The Planning and Zoning Commission plans to hold a workshop later this month to discuss a possible regulation change to allow a medical marijuana facility in town. Now, the commission came up with a moratorium a while back on medical marijuana facilities. And this is a quote from PCC member Jim Fitzsimmons. When the state of Connecticut changed their laws in 2012, that is to allow these types of facilities, we as a commission decided that rather than have someone come in with a zone change, we'd issue a moratorium so we can look at the issue. So the Wallingford Planning Commission was concerned about these facilities, and now we'll hold a workshop on March 24th. There are, I was reminded, 4 medical marijuana facilities, 6 around the state. Hartford, Branford, Bethel, South Windsor, Uncasville, and Bristol.
You got to drive to all those places. There's no place close. That's why this is your Story of the Week, right?
Well, right.
Isn't that right?
But the thing also, too, is the article goes on to state it's unlikely that we're necessarily going to get a place closer, because apparently what has happened is a lot of people registered for medical marijuana, but people actually going to facilities is not what they expected.
No, that's the P&Z off the hook. Craig,
Right.
Any thoughts, reflections on this broad issue, medical marijuana, citing it in Wallingford?
Well, I think Planning and Zoning missed the boat on this issue. I think the moratorium, it allowed the moratorium to for other facilities to get approved, and now that Wallingford's going to talk about it, the bus has already left the station.
Do you think that was the point of the moratorium?
That would be paranoid of me.
Oh, that's what I think.
I do, too.
Yeah. Let the time pass. And,
I agree.
Yeah. Let some. So I got a couple of marijuana stories for you. Because
it's in the news all the time.
It's
in a lot of ways, marijuana is more in the news than ever.
So speaking of getting off the hook, Ralph, I retract. I really apologize.
Oh, that's okay.
The Hartford Current, March 17th.
Yeah.
Headline, off the record, a court clears a way to erase pot convictions.
Right.
Hartford, thousands of people arrested in Connecticut for marijuana possession now have the right to get their convictions erased. After the state Supreme Court ruled Monday that the violation had been downgraded to the same legal level as a parking ticket. Wasn't even controversial. The 7-0 ruling came in the cases of a former Manchester and Bolton resident who had asked for his convictions to be overturned after the legislature decriminalized possession of small amounts of pot in 2011. And there you go. So, and one more article on marijuana, we'll get Craig's final word on it. Record Journal, March 12, 2015. The headline was, the headline described a Quinnipiac poll, and it says, marijuana does better than Malloy in the polls, and the casinos didn't do so well. Expansion of casinos didn't so well. The last 3 paragraphs are worth referring to. So 3 questions on the Quinnipiac poll. Do you support or oppose reducing possession of small amounts of marijuana from a felony to a misdemeanor? And said, yeah. 67% said, yeah, we don't need to have it a felony. How about the eliminating mandatory minimum sentences for possession of small amounts? And 82% said, let's eliminate mandatory sentences. We're getting too excited about it, And then the final question reported here, do you support or oppose allowing adults to legally possess small amounts? 63% said, yeah. Let me read that again.
Yeah.
Do you support or oppose allowing adults in Connecticut to legally possess small amounts of marijuana for personal use? And support was 63%.
Yeah.
Support was 63% to allow adults to possess small amounts, 34% opposed.
And that last one would seem to indicate that that same 60% might be favorable to actually selling marijuana legally, or maybe I'm reading too much into it.
Maybe reading too much
Okay.
into it. Let's wait for the next
All right,
poll.
okay.
Yeah. Craig, what do you think about this?
Interesting about the
Yeah.
Supreme Court decision, the statute they're dealing with is Connecticut General Statute 21-279C. And actually under the gun statutes, anybody who's been convicted of that is ineligible to possess a firearm for life. So this is also going to open up all of those people to be able to get pistol permits. We've had thousands and thousands of people, I mean, I sit on the board for the state with regard to that, that we have been unable to give them the relief that they've sought because they have that on their record. So that's going to open up a lot of people to be able to get that.
And you're in favor of that. That's a good thing from your perspective.
Well, generally, yes.
Yeah.
I think for someone to be for life barred to have a firearm because they got caught with a roach in their ashtray is a little ridiculous.
Roach in their ashtray.
Right. We're using marijuana language.
Roach in the,
That's
you
very
know,
good.
a quick update on the Lyman Hall track
Yeah.
situation. We put a lot of time in on that
Right.
story, and it kind of dropped out of the headlines for now, but the question is, what's happening? When's it going to go out to bid? What kind of funding is it going to get? When will a new track be installed? So as of this afternoon, of course, we produce the shows on Wednesday for broadcast on Thursday, but as of Wednesday afternoon, the draft bid specs for the track project is in purchasing department's hands. They've only had it since Friday. They've only had it for 3 working days now. Well, actually 2. Well, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And the purchasing agent has some technical corrections to make. I don't know how many he's still working on. It's a big, thick, I mean, this is not like a 1 or 2 page document. It's a big, thick booklet with technical specs and with many components, which I'm going to describe in a minute. He's going to find some problems. He's got some problems. He's going to have to go back to the architect. He's going to have to redo it. And, that's where we are. Now, what's being called for is a 6-lane track with an option for 8 lanes.
Right.
An option for artificial turf field, and an option for even better lights. They have the base bid is for lights, I think, with a 10-year warranty, but there's an option for a 25-year warranty, which might cost a little more money. But the timing is very problematic. Craig, your reaction to all this?
If I recall correctly, when we voted to, when we talked about this, we talked about it expediting this process. And, it's time to cut bait or fish, and let's get this done.
Yeah. We talked with Christine Mansfield, I think, on the last show about this plan of the Public Utilities Commission to have this property inspection program where the PUC would hire a full-time inspector to go around in certain situations, knock on doors and see if there's an illegal connection to sanitary sewers. Remember that?
I do.
Okay. So I wanted to bring that up to get Craig's reaction to the whole issue, because I think Craig was one of the first, if not the only one, to raise search and seizure issues. You just can't, as a public official representing government, demand entry into a Craig raised that. But I found a little piece of video from the last council meeting. It shows Vinnie Testa sort of describing the issue after a lengthier presentation by the PUC. So let's watch that, and then we'll go right to Craig. So we got this little video. 3, 2, 1, hit it.
So we've got a problem where our treatment plant is receiving too much water that shouldn't be going there. And there's a possibility we're going to reach some capacity at some point. It's going to cause us to have to invest a lot of money to upgrade our plant. We'd like to avoid that. It's always been wrong, against the rules, for someone to have a sump pump in their basement going into the sanitary line. But people have been doing it, and that's a problem. You have a lot of sources of problems, so you've been attempting to locate where they are. You have a lot of money put aside to do that investigation. we have an ordinance that says if we catch you, you have to fix it. So far, so good?
Yes.
So right now, we're saying what we're going to do is we're going to continue investigating, correct? And see if we can locate these problems, but we're going to try to give an incentive for people to self-report. And if somebody self-reports, we'll share the cost with them.
We're not planning to limit the reimbursement just to those who self-support.
Oh, I understand that.
Okay.
No, I understand that.
Okay, sorry.
Right. So my point here is, if I'm illegally dumping water into the sanitary line, I don't care if you're going to split the cost with me. I'm still not going to tell you, because it's still going to cost me money. So I don't really know I'm just saying, I don't know how much benefit we're going to get from this saying, hey, if you tell us, because if you catch me, I have to pay. So when we have this discussion, I'm going to try to figure out what you might really accomplish by this, because you still have to find them, these problems, whatever they may be. And the only benefit I can see so far is you may find more if people say, I have one. And the only incentive you're giving them to say, I have one, is to say, it's not going to cost you as much, but you're still going to have to pay something. So I think that there's going to be I don't see what, that percentage of benefit is I see is very small. Okay. But we can argue this at the ordinance committee. But see, that's how I'm viewing this.
Very honestly.
I've got it pretty much succinct. That's the story, right?
Craig, this whole issue is going to be coming to the committee that you chair. It's the ordinance committee of the town council. What's your reaction to this issue?
Well, first of all, to Councilor Testa in the video, I always appreciate that he's able to take in a lot of information, get rid of the periphery, and go to the heart. And I always like that about Finney. I agree with everything that he said. Once again, the Fourth Amendment situation is chilling to me. I specifically asked the question that night, do you mean to tell me when somebody comes in for a permit to redo their roof, that gives the PUC the right to go and inspect the basement? And I was told yes. And that's of significant concern to me. Not that I'm in favor of people breaking the law or doing something bad, but we certainly have privacy in our home and our papers and all that stuff. It's going to take a talk, and I look forward to the discussions.
Ralph?
Well, I continue to find it confusing. Yeah. And I think Christine was confused, and you and Christine had sat in on the meeting, and it seemed like she at least was having trouble figuring out where they were going with this, and I continue to have trouble figuring out where they're going with this.
Well, I think it's a little squishy.
Yeah, squishy at best, Mike.
I think it's a little squishy. I think it was last week, I don't know if you mentioned this to me on camera or it was off camera and we didn't have time to get to it, but I think you were sort of wondering whether the program was more for show,
right,
to impress property owners than it was really intended to get a result. What was your...
from what Vinny is describing, I don't see that's what this is for, so I'm more confused.
Yeah. But it does leave Wallingford with a big problem, which is groundwater, rainwater infiltrating sewer pipes and potentially overloading the wastewater treatment plant. And
well, how do we know that's true, though?
Well, the PUC has been saying that consistently for many years.
Okay.
But you're right. I don't think we have any data. I mean, I didn't ask for any.
No, and I know, and I didn't mean to.
But I bet you Craig and his committee might
right. That would be a question to ask.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Although this is a revision to an ordinance that's already in place, that being able to search and that kind of stuff, that's already in place. I objected when it passed. This revision, if anything, is merely the financial component. Okay. But in our discussions, I'm going to speak with the law department about the Fourth Amendment issues.
Good.
Yeah. And Craig, when do you or how long do you think this process is going to take with the PUC? And I know a lot of it depends upon their availability and how quickly they get information to you, like specific language. Is this by the end of the summer kind of a project?
Well, I think I recommended at the town council meeting that they get their idea to the law department now,
Right.
so that we could see some perhaps proposed language for our next meeting, which I believe is May 2nd. Given that, I would say that it would reasonably be addressed by the end of the summer.
Yeah, so in the column that I write for the Record Journal, which is coming out this Sunday, I deal with this issue a little bit, and I can't remember how I ended. It's probably still a preliminary draft, not for release code. But I think I say, hey, look out, everybody, there may be an inspector knocking on your door. But the requirement for a warrant, whether or not town officials need a warrant, which would not be impossible to get, I suppose, in some situations, I think needs to be addressed squarely so that everybody is comfortable with the results. Either the town's going to get a warrant, or there is a clear, clean, crisp explanation as to why they don't need a search warrant.
I agree.
That's take the question out of it.
We had also evidently, and I haven't looked at the statute recently, but I think that under the ordinance, they're allowed to walk around your house on your property and inspect your gutters without any notice, which is, another issue.
Yeah. So kind of a blockbuster of a news story that appeared on the Record Journal website. Good job for the Record Journal for ferreting this out.
Thank you.
You're welcome. On the online version of the Record Journal, the headline is FOI Hearing Officer, Freedom of Information Hearing Officer. Wallingford Center, Inc. is a public agency. Organization won't appeal. I don't know what's going to be in the printed version, but that's on the online version that I read this afternoon before I came over. Everyone watching this show knows what I'm referring to.
Right.
There's been a disagreement as to the law between Craig Fishbein and Wallingford Center, Inc., the nonprofit that has assumed some responsibility for beautification and activities downtown. So this is a lead sentence by Eric Vo, who wrote the story, then we'll hand it over to Craig, get his reaction. A proposed decision has found Wallingford Center, Inc. is a public agency and is subject to the Freedom of Information Act. The organization said Friday that it will not appeal. That can't be right. I think the organization probably said today that it's not going to appeal, but maybe they said it on Friday. When the information said Friday that it will not appeal when the Freedom of Information Commission votes on the decision at its April 8th meeting. Craig, just walk us through that lead sentence, proposed decision, why isn't it a real decision, April 8th meeting, won't appeal. Just start with that and then take us through a little bit of the controversy that you're having.
Well, procedurally, we had a trial hearing before a hearing officer that acts like a judge, makes rulings on evidence and what's going to come into evidence, and here's the testimony. And then that individual issues a proposed ruling. Very detailed, what they found, what the law is, and what they would propose as a remedy based upon those findings. That's not a final decision per se. The proposed decision then goes before the FOI Commission for a vote. And in my research, I've never seen them not approve a recommended decision, but that's the procedure. So that's the April 8th date.
Okay, and what is the practical impact of this decision on Wallingford Center, Inc.? What are they going to have to start doing, if anything? What are they going to have to stop doing, if anything?
Well, first of all, they are supposed to get me the 3 years of minutes and agendas that I had previously requested. And then going forward, they would post their meetings and make available to the public their minutes, like any other public agency.
Is that so bad?
No, I think it's a good thing.
Okay.
I do think it's a good thing.
Okay.
And I think what this also does is, and I don't know how this affects, if you have requests for, say, information about, their budget or past decisions they've made. In other words, if they have records, written records that they've kept prior to being ruled a public agency, are all those documents public?
Yes.
Okay.
Anything that would be subject to FOI ordinarily would also come with this, under this umbrella.
So really, they're an open book at this point.
Yeah. Craig, how much of a burden do you think this will put on Wallingford Center Rink?
Well, I have no idea what their infrastructure is, so I could never comment on that.
Yeah. Any thoughts? I got some thoughts, but...
Yeah, well, I don't think it's as much of a burden as receiving, what, 3/4 of their funding from the town? I mean, it's hard to argue. That's what surprised me about this case was two things.
Yeah.
One, you had a counselor who was making a request for basic information as the council was being asked to vote on funding, which just seemed to be common sense, if not freedom of information. And number two, that you would claim burden when you're receiving 3/4 of your funding from the town. So.
Yeah, so I just want to explain the headline a little bit. It says Wallingford Center Rink is a public agency. Here's what that does not mean, and as Craig explained it, here's what it does mean. It does not mean that the town, the mayor, the town council can start pushing Wallingford Center Rink around.
Right.
They're still, a freestanding organization that determines its own destiny, determines its own, its own path. The town can determine its own path, too. I mean, if it doesn't like what Wallingford Center Rink does, it could reduce funding or cut funding. So it doesn't mean that the town now is sort of a dominant force, can push them around. But what it does mean is that Wallingford Center Rink is going to have to, as Craig said, make their agendas public, give the public a chance to come and listen on the meetings. The public doesn't have a right to talk. They don't have a right for public question and answer. Public doesn't have a right to on every vote to sort of weigh in. No, they have a right to sit and watch, and they have a right to get minutes and other documents not otherwise exempt. Most other documents would be disclosable under the Freedom of Information Act. Craig, the test for what is or isn't a public agency, how did the Freedom of Information hearing officer apply the law?
Well, the test is whether or not the entity performs a governmental function, the level of governmental funding, the extent of the government involvement or regulation, and whether or not the entity was created by the government. So when I presented the case and argued through my brief how I thought the hearing officer should look at the evidence, I argued that the first three prongs were met, and I conceded the fourth because it would be futile to argue that the government created WCI. So I don't tend to make futile arguments. So, and the hearing officer agreed with me on all three of those points.
Governmental function. One criteria is whether or not Wallingford Center Inc. performs a governmental function. What is a governmental function, or how do we know, what a governmental function is when we see it?
What I presented to the hearing officer was minutes from back in the 80s and the 90s of the Public Celebrations Committee, and things that they were asking for and doing and making representations to the council. And then I also presented their budgets for that period of time, and then showed that Public Celebrations isn't doing those things anymore, and that WCI is instead, and then showed their budget and how their budget has gone up and Public Celebrations has gone down over that same period of time. So that was the main example of a governmental function.
Yeah, so on page 3 of the decision, there's a finding. It says the hearing officer found it is found that Wallingford Center Inc. purchases flags, wreaths, Christmas lights and plants for the town, organizes the Gardener's Market, holiday stroll, restaurant hop and buy a brick events, and organizes and funds Celebrate Wallingford, an annual event which was created by Wallingford Center Inc., among other functions. And a paragraph down, it says, it is found, this is the hearing officer talking, that fostering economic revitalization and development are governmental functions, and the respondents are performing those functions. Ba-bam.
Yeah.
That's that criteria right there that the hearing officer dealt with. Funding. Craig, level of funding. Walk us through the logic of the hearing officer on that point.
Well, I argued that 100% of their operating budget and a portion of their program budget is paid for by the town. Basically, she agreed with that position on actual dollars, but then also found that the town of Wallingford gives benefit to WCI without reimbursement, such as storing the wreaths that WCI owns, installing the bricks that WCI directs Public Works where they're going to go, things like that without reimbursement. So ultimately made a finding that the funding was substantial.
Yeah, the law of the state, as recited by the hearing officer, is that all relevant factors, all 4 factors that we mentioned, are to be considered cumulatively, but no single factor is essential or conclusive, meaning the hearing officer can take these 4 criteria that we've talked about, sort of put them in a witch's brew, stir them up, and the hearing officer gives weight to 1 or 2 or 3, or all 4. But the hearing officer pulls out of this witch's brew of evidence a conclusion. Mm-hmm. And that conclusion will stand unless it's just palpably false and arbitrary, and just offends common sense. So it's not a precise measure. A lot of discretion is with the hearing officer to sort of find the facts and weight them accordingly. Craig, there are members of the town council that are on the Wallingford Centering board. There's sort of a connection between the town council and Wallingford Centering board of directors. Is that important to determining whether or not it's a public agency?
I think it's a factor.
Okay.
I think it's an ethical issue that I disagree with. I think I've been pretty public about that. That in and of itself, I don't think that tips the scale. But certainly when one sits on 2 different groups in a leadership position, you have a fiduciary duty to those groups, and perhaps that's the reason why nobody on the town council, none of my fellow councilors, supported me in this.
Yeah. Well, there are some folks that are just apoplectic about this issue, and the fact that Wallingford Center Inc. could be a public agency, or someone is saying that they are, just apoplectic. I don't see the burden as that great, as indicated before. You prepare an agenda anyway for your board members. If you're Wallingford Center Inc., you prepare an agenda anyway, just make an extra copy, for the town clerk. You prepare minutes anyway, just make an extra copy for the town clerk. Well, if you're reasonably organized in your filing system, especially with electronic filing, you drop things in electronic files, and you have an executive director, you stay pretty well organized. I don't see it as a real big burden.
No, and just back to my earlier point, Wallingford Center Inc. does have another avenue that they could go. I don't think they will, and I think it almost proves Craig's case. They could try to go without government funding and government services. Right?
Yes, but they're still performing government functions.
Well,
without the
okay,
government
right,
money.
and they could try to, they could try to separate themselves. I don't think they're going to go that route.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I don't think so either. But their whole reason for being are some of these events and activities cited by the hearing officer that I recited, which go to the core of their being and which are government functions.
Okay.
They're performing government functions with money or without.
No, and that's an excellent point. So I wonder, and I want to. One of the things I'm curious about is how does this affect other organizations? For example,
good point.
Because you had brought up the Celebrate Wallingford Festival.
Yeah.
So there is in Southington there is a festival that's even bigger than our downtown festival. It's the Apple Harvest Festival. And I believe the way it's set up now is there's an Apple Harvest Committee that oversees this festival. I don't know. I think it doesn't do anything beyond the Apple Harvest Festival. And I do believe that the Apple Harvest Festival is, quote-unquote, self-funded, although I'd have to check that. So does that group seem to, I know I've just given you a few basic facts.
No, I don't think it would meet the prongs.
Okay.
I mean, wouldn't meet the funding prong if they don't get any governmental
Right.
funding. Is just putting on a fair a governmental function? So you lose on those two prongs. And then, if they get some services, maybe some police and fire, is that enough? I don't think it's enough.
Craig, should any other Wallingford nonprofits be worried as a result of this decision?
Well, no one should be worried. They should be guided. One of the groups that comes to my mind is perhaps the Cemetery Association. I think that I think I've said this to you before. I think it's an easier case against the Cemetery Association, and I think it would apply to them. That's the first one that comes to mind.
Anything else we need to know about this decision, or what happens next?
Well, my understanding is there's going to be compliance. Perhaps the only other thing I wanted to mention is that 3 times since this whole thing has started, Steve Knight has utilized his Sunday column to take pot shots. And in each of his columns, he has said, November 23rd, for example, our meetings are in fact not closed. He's continually said that their meetings are open to the public. Not true. And, I just don't like it when people don't tell the truth.
Okay. Well, we got that resolved.
Yeah, we did.
We got that resolved. Let's talk about sex.
Yes, and actually...
Actually, I don't want to talk about it. It's in the Record Journal front page today.
Right, and
so
this...
I'm not just bringing this up because that interests me particularly, but I read it. I had to. It was on the front page.
Okay, all right.
Go ahead.
Well, I think when you were crediting us with ferreting out a story,
yeah.
This was the story I thought you were referring to.
Oh, okay. Tell me why you thought. First of all, let's get our viewers in on what we're talking about. On the headline, the front page of the Record Journal, March 17, the headline was, I think it was above the fold.
Yes.
2, which is a very important spot.
Right, was stripped across the top.
Stripped across the top.
Stripped is what we say in the business, so to speak.
The perks of being a wallflower.
Here go the sex.
Yeah, right.
The perks of being a wallflower removed from English classes after Wallingford parent complains. Most of our viewers kind of know what the story refers to, but I'm intrigued by your comment at my segue into this. What was the activity? What was the reporting that the Record Journal was able to do that uncovered this?
Well, just that this was something that we had developed on our own. As you know, with the...
How? If you can say.
Well, no, actually, and I'm sorry I'm getting so
Sources
hung up on this.
Yeah.
As with Craig's FOI decision,
right.
We got a little help on that.
Okay.
So I didn't want to take credit for ferreting out the Craig Fishbein.
Okay. Well, here's the basics of the story,
right.
And then we'll go from there. And it's a very serious sort of issue with respect to at least one parent. I don't know about everybody else, but at least one parent takes it very seriously, and it's a subject that requires some delicacy in talking about, especially if you're on TV. So right away, my hands are tied because you know how blunt I like to be. And,
yes, right.
It's impossible to, sometimes, walk that tightrope. But this is how it started. The article started. Eric Vo, a coming-of-age novel, was removed from the required high school freshman English curriculum by the school superintendent after a parent complained that the book included references to homosexuality, date rape, and masturbation. The book, The Perks of Being a Wallflower, was selected by teachers for freshman English classes this school year. I'm going to digress for a minute.
Yeah.
My understanding is that the English teachers could opt in. They weren't required to do that. But so it was, I think, up to each individual English teacher. The book's narrator is a freshman who tells his story through letters written throughout the school year. The novel was adopted into a film in 2012, and the story goes on to say that a parent who is now a member of the Board of Education became aware of this book and became concerned. And I'm going to read the next passage in the article to sort of make us, help us get on the same page. And this is a quote. from J.P. Bolat. I hope I'm pronouncing Jean-Pierre Bolat. He says, quote, "In September, my son came up to me one night and was very anxious about a book he was reading. For a freshman in high school to come up and say that, it drew my concerns," Bolat said. "I read it and I was very offended by the passage." He added that some of the passages dealt with homosexuality, masturbation, sex, and a glorification of alcohol and drugs. One section of the novel that Bolat highlighted describes a boy and a girl engaging in sex despite her saying no. That's a description of date rape, Bolat said. And the article goes on for there. I may refer to it later on in our discussion, but I wanted to start there. And Ralph, as a matter of journalism and as the the #1 editor, why is this a story? And I'm going to ask Craig the same thing if he wants to weigh in. I know for an elected official not on the Board of Ed, it's kind of tough to weigh in. But why is this a story?
Well, first of all, the superintendent of schools,
Yeah.
and I think this is important to remember,
Okay.
made a decision to remove a book from the curriculum after teachers had heard the complaint and decided to not make any change. So I think you had a superintendent making a very rare decision, as far as we know, to remove a book from the curriculum after teachers who are much closer to it, I think, than he is, had said the book's okay. The other thing that plays into this story that we didn't have a chance to develop completely, I mean, we'll be following this story up, but as we talked about prior to the show, you have a superintendent of schools making a decision on a book that a Board of Education member has complained about. And, that's his boss. I haven't fully thought that through, but I think that's an important element to this.
Is it a fair rebuttal to point out that when the complaint was made initially, that parent who complained was not yet a board member, not yet at least officially a candidate for the board? He later became a board member, but is that a fair rebuttal to your comment?
Well, it's a fair rebuttal to listen. First of all, we haven't established a timeline here.
Okay.
I don't know the timeline, but even if, as Mr. Bolat said, this complaint came before there was any thought in anybody's mind that he would be joining the Board of Education, he's still on the Board of Education now. And so, no, that's not enough to say, well, I wasn't on the board then. He has a right as a parent to, like any other parent, but you can't then cancel the fact that he's now on the Board of Education.
Greg, do you want to weigh in on this? I can see you may not want to, but
first of all, I can't talk about the content because I haven't read the book, and that would be irresponsible of me. But just looking at the process, and understanding, the timeline, we haven't figured it out. But we don't know, it could be as innocuous as Mr. Bolat called up Dr. Menzo and expressed a concern over the telephone, and Dr. Menzo didn't know that when Mr. Bolat came up for the Board of Ed, it was the same guy. So you sort of have to ferret that out. But if Dr. Menzo knew that this was the complainer, I totally embrace what Ralph said about the boss-employee situation. And I know if it was me, I probably would have gone to the Board of Ed if I was the superintendent. I have this issue because essentially the Board of Ed employs the superintendent.
Right.
I don't feel comfortable doing this because we might have, public outcry. So what do you think? And let the boss, which is the Board of Ed, make the decision.
So moving down the article to try to
Right.
get some facts as reported, it says Bolat filed the complaint with Rosemary Duffy, who is the principal of Sheehan High School, who I called, by the way, but I didn't get a call back today. I'm going to explain that.
Right.
Make me get back to that
Okay.
if I lose my train of thought. It happens a lot. And she hadn't read the book, but referred the issue to the assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and Bolat sent that letter January 1, and later that month, which would be January 2015, he appeared before a committee of teachers and library staff to explain why he wanted to have the book removed. But they considered it and decided not to remove it.
Right.
Okay? So my grievance with the story as written is, what were the reasons for the book being placed on the reading list to begin with? I mean, they didn't just pick trash and smut and porn. There was a reason that teachers that, you know, we love and respect, I mean, we compliment the Board of Ed all the time, we compliment the teaching corps, they, you know, with knowledge and willfully said, sure, you know, there are some passages here in a coming-of-age book with young men and women, you know, experiencing their sexuality for the first time, but they decided that there was something about this book which made it worthy for young kids to read. And that wasn't presented, that's not appearing in the story, and I'm sort of hungry for those reasons, because I have a feeling there may be a counterweight, that those reasons may be a counterweight to one parent saying this is too much for my child. And I don't want to make light of that, but there's got to be that counterweight, at least I was looking for that. So the story goes on. This committee says, you know, we're going to keep it. We're going to keep the book on the reading list. And it was a superintendent that said, no, it's no longer on the reading list, despite the initial advice at the beginning of the year to put the book on, despite you know, the process that it went through. And it seems like one parent, because of sensibilities, as far as we know, affecting one person, got the book pulled. I don't know if that's a healthy precedent. I just raised that issue. I want to kick it around with you guys. I mean, I don't know.
Right,
I mean, I could be all by myself on this.
No, and I think you make first of all, you make a good point about talking to teachers, and I think we should do that at some point in this story. I also, though, think that just like you didn't get a return call from Mrs. Duthie,
she might have been busy.
She may have been busy, but you also have to understand the position she's now in as our teachers, which is their boss has ruled.
Yeah, right.
And his boss is apparently one of his bosses. So it's a difficult position for a teacher to be in. The second thing I would say is that, again, that, you know, the headline, you know, makes the point, parent complains, book yanked from English class. And you just said a bad precedent of one parent getting a book pulled. And I would just make the point again that the superintendent of schools did not have to take the action. And Mr. Bolat did not put a gun to Mr. Menzo's head. There were many other options that Mr. Menzo had.
Yeah.
And I think that some of this is for him to explain, quite frankly, not necessarily. We've heard from Mr. Bolat. Okay.
So I pulled up the iPad, and I hope to be able to get through this. This is there's study guides on this book.
Right.
This book has been around. It's widely read, especially to the younger generation. It kind of speaks to the younger generation.
There's a movie, excuse me. There was a movie made out of it.
So I actually downloaded the book, and I started to flip through it to see what's going on.
Okay.
Of course, in one day, I didn't have too much, but I was able to get a recap of the plot.
Go ahead.
It may be useful if we sort of kick that around. So this is not my language. This is from the study guide, but the plot says Charlie, who is the protagonist in this story. Charlie is a 15-year-old, and look for the salacious parts.
Okay, I am.
I'm
always looking for the salacious parts. You know that.
Okay, yeah, we're looking for the grunge.
I blush.
Yes, I know. You're the house prude here. Charlie is a 15-year-old who has just begun his freshman year in high school. He greatly misses his aunt Helen, who passed away when he was 7, and he feels very lonely sometimes. Charlie narrates the novel by means of letters written to a friend whom he has never met but has heard of and thinks would be a good listener, sort of like a diary, I think, you know, dear diary. He gets most of the joy in his life out of his advanced English class and the conversations about literature that he has had with his teacher, Bill. Bill assigns Charlie many extra credit books to read and hopes that Charlie will learn a lot about himself and about life from the readings. Charlie becomes friends with a senior boy named Patrick. Now that name comes up, remember, who he finds out is having a secret homosexual relationship with a football player named Brad, and falls in love with Patrick's sister, Sam. I think Charlie falls in love with Sam. I think that's what that means. Charlie begins exploring the social scene that he never really feels a part of, drinking, experimenting with drugs, and smoking cigarettes. He has a falling out with Patrick and Sam when he kisses Sam rather than the girl he is dating during a game of Truth or Dare. Charlie is hesitant to fix his relationship with his friends until he jumps in to help Patrick in a fight against some football players, including Brad, who, trying to keep his secret, called Patrick a faggot. Charlie develops a deeper experience. Charlie develops a deeper relationship than ever with both Patrick and Sam, and learns some things about himself along the way that have caused him to be the wallflower that he is. That's the plot synopsis by this particular reviewer. And again, the headline, "The Perks of Being a Wallflower," and that's the connection. You know, he's become a wallflower. I'll take this down. Craig, let me, before I move to the next, subcategory in this general topic, any thoughts so far? You want to weigh in any part of this?
Well, I don't place a lot of reliance upon someone else's plot synopsis. It's like going on Wikipedia and,
Yeah.
I still have questions. Was this a new book, or has it been on the list for a while? I don't know. Did others complain? I have no idea. And is the committee the usual procedure? Other than that, the timeline, I think, is very important.
I think the timeline is important,
Yeah.
as reported in the Record Journal. The decision made to pull the book from the reading list. It's not banned from the library, so we have to be careful the use of
right.
words. Was in February, and I think Mr. Bolat was on the Board of Ed by then. One of the issues that comes up in this general discussion, which is very difficult to discuss, especially if your child is involved and your child is feeling stress or discomfort about a topic being discussed at school, and then if you find out this topic is sex or homosexuality or something like that, I can see where parents may want to just stop that by stopping
Absolutely.
the educational spigots. Turn off the educational spigots, and then that stress is relieved. You're looking at me in some disbelief. Why isn't that what's going on?
No,
Talk to me.
No,
Walk me
because
off the
I
ledge.
was I was ready to agree.
Uh-oh.
Listen, I could understand a
Yeah.
parent. Again, I haven't read the book, but just in general, having dealt with a couple high school students, raised a couple myself,
Yeah.
I could understand Mr. Bolat being extremely concerned when his son had the reaction to the book that he had. And certainly he was well within his rights, at the very least at that point, to say to the teacher, listen, I'm not sure this is the best book for my son to read. So I understand that reaction. But taking it from there to, I don't want other children to read it, in general, is what I have some questions about. I mean, he has a right to do it, but I'm not sure the school system should have let him take his son being upset and make that something that means that other children can't read the book.
But he didn't make that decision.
No, he didn't. No, the school superintendent did, right. I guess what I'm quibbling with is I think as a parent, you have a right to go up to the school and say, I don't want my son reading this book. And if I would have supported him 100% if the school had in some way said, no, your son has to read that book. And I think as a parent, he had a right to then object to that. But that the process that he went through was not about his son not reading the book. It was about other people's sons and daughters not reading the book.
So the process of education, multifaceted as it is,
Right.
you're exposed to a lot of different perspectives, involves, I think, a good education, putting the student in a stressful situation in that conventional paradigms are challenged. Lack of experience leads to greater experience. A narrow perspective, and I'm not saying anyone
No.
here has one,
No.
you're introduced under penalty of not making the grade
Right.
to a broader experience. So stress is inherent. I remember when I was a freshman in college, I took American History 101 or something. I first learned really about slavery. Boy, did that make me stressed. That make me stressed. And maybe if there's someone around there that I could say, I don't know if I can handle this, no way could that course be stopped. Learn about the Holocaust for the first time. Very upsetting, very disturbing.
Right.
So
No, you're right.
the process of education means leading young people into areas that they haven't been in before. And a coming-of-age book by golly, involves us. Now, here's some context.
Go ahead.
You're really going to get mad at me.
No, no.
Here's some context. You and I discussed this,
Go ahead.
this survey, this health survey.
Yes,
When it first came out in the fall.
right.
And I think this health survey is going to be discussed at the next town council meeting on Tuesday. So this is the context in Wallingford. I'm sorry, this is the context. So questions were asked of students about their alcohol use and sexual behaviors, which is in the book as part of what Charlie is going through. Page 51 of the survey, 31.5% of Wallingford students said they ever had sexual intercourse. Females 31%, males 32%. In the 9th grade, it's 14%, 10th grade rounding it up to 20%, 11th grade 41%, 12th grade 55%. So this is going on. I mean, kids,
Yeah.
when you get into high school,
Right. No, good point.
you know,
It's
as a
absolutely
student,
going on.
you know what's cooking. Maybe you're not engaging, but you know what's you know.
Well, but even Mike, you and I and Craig, I don't want to embarrass anybody here,
Yeah.
but I mean we're not so old that we can't remember
I am.
what went on in high school.
I got to read these
Okay,
surveys.
so I think we all know that this stuff goes on in high school. There's not any question about that.
This is context.
Right, go ahead.
The next question. Sexual behaviors. It says 22% of Wallingford students had sexual intercourse with one or more people during the past 3 months, meaning currently sexually active. The aggregate average was 22% females, yeah, and 21% males, yeah. You get into high school, she in high school, almost 20% said, yeah, currently sexually active. At Lyman Hall, 23.7%. The next question on page 56. Of students who had sexual intercourse during the past 3 months, 59.4 of Wallingford students used a condom during the last sexual intercourse. Summary statistics, 57.3%, just over half of sexually active students. Consider that.
Yeah.
Half using a
Right.
condom. So if you want to use a book or something like that, and maybe to present the risks of risky behavior, you do that maybe in the safety of a classroom with an adult present who is a teacher. I'm not an education expert, but maybe that there's a place for that. Apparently there is, because the schools are hiring someone now, a health liaison officer, to coordinate these efforts. The rebuttal is, don't teach it in school. I'll deal with it at home. That's the rebuttal. Craig, your thoughts, and then we'll get to Ralph.
Well, I think it's a teaching moment. That's
Yeah.
really, I mean, these two subjects dovetail into each other. You can basically give any piece of literature to children, adolescents, and it's what you do with it after they're exposed to it that is the issue. So even with this book, while there might be some objectionable things in there, like the date rape issue, if you come away and you have a discussion with the kids, that's an example of date rape. That's not a good situation. If it happens, and if it happens, this is what you should do. That's a teaching moment.
It's a teaching moment. I agree completely, and I can envision a classroom where a teacher might say, if this happened to anybody that you know of, happened to a friend, here's what you do. This is how you. That's absolutely correct. Let's move on. No, I'm going to give you the last word.
I am, but I don't want to open up I'm going to open up a can
That's
of worms.
That's what the show is all about. It's wormy.
It concerned me that, and I haven't met Mr. Bolat, so I really want to be careful here about not judging him by one story in the Record Journal. But it concerned me that he cited homosexuality as a reason that he objected to the book, and I wondered if that concerns you also.
That didn't stick out.
Okay.
What popped out at me was this was a sensitive spot, and some students are more mature than others. Some families are more open, and this was something that family wasn't ready for.
Okay.
And it could have been a combination of things, but I just think the whole issue of sexuality, is just very difficult, and so. Where is the source of stress coming from? You find it's from the classroom, and so the natural reaction as a loving, caring parent, you go to the source of the stress and you say, what can we do about it? And they say, there's a process. The parent says, I want to go through that process. And that's, as Craig pointed out, that's how it came down.
Right.
But there's context and there's two sides to that. So,
And everybody knows their kids, too.
Yeah.
Not all children are able to be exposed to everything.
Yeah.
So, on the other, so a parent going to the school and saying, my child isn't ready for this is many times appropriate.
So we're getting the hook.
We're getting the hook.
Yeah, we're
Right,
getting
good.
the hook.
You saw it, okay.
But a quick thing, because Craig has some experience of this. The fireworks has had more publicity than I think it's warranted, with letters to the editor battling back and forth. I don't know. It just seems to me, Craig, this is a question, the money for, $15,000 that Jason Zandri wants from the town would have been there and probably is there. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely.
In the budget, in the town budget?
Absolutely.
Without all this brouhaha?
The $30,000 is in there.
So as far as when you count the votes on the council, the fireworks will go on if Jason raises the cost of the vendor?
I have no idea because we haven't seen the budget. But
that's what I'm asking
I
you.
intend to make a motion at some point.
To help out with the fireworks.
Absolutely.
There you go. See, I think that's.
Glad you got that one.
I think that's clear. So we're running out of time. Let's call it quits. But there's some other stuff I wanted to get to, but you're not going to be around when I do, because you're going to be away next week and the following week.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sorry,
and we have
Mike.
some special guests coming in.
Good.
Yes, we do.
Excellent.
And when you come back, we're going to have the police chief on.
Oh, that's great.
There we go.
Yeah, that's great. Nice
Thanks
job.
for tuning in to the Citizen Mike Show. Craig, thank you for coming on the show.
thank you for having me.
appreciate it. We, I appreciate Craig's
Yes,
comments. And we
did a great job.
You particularly, Ralph. I'm very proud of you.
Okay.
We produce on Wednesdays. You got to see the show on Thursday at 9 o'clock. If not that, Fridays at 6:30, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday at 9. Hey, if it's 9 at night, it's Citizen Mike. Good night, everybody.